Thank you for joining myself and my guest, Marc Singer, today on A Conversation On. And this topic today, we're going to be talking about what it's like to live in a time in our life where we've both sort of been in a confined situation, not of our choice or of our doing, and how we've dealt with that during the time. And as you will find out, Marc has a very, very strong story and very inspiring story about how he went through a very difficult time in his life. So I will just very quickly introduce Marc, and then I'll let him tell you his story. But Marc is a fellow mindset coach, calls himself the men's coach, but I know he does work with women as well, but I think predominantly men. But yeah, so Marc, at a very quite long time ago in his life, was in prison for something that he didn't commit, that he didn't do, and spent many, many years in prison. And during that time, also went through some very, very difficult life challenges, like bereavement, and a lot more on top, while living in a very, very difficult times. And there's more to it. I know there's even darker places that goes. But came through it, came out the other side, and is now has his own business working as a coach and now helps other people. So we resonate. I'll come back to that in a moment. But for anyone that knows me and knows my story, you can obviously, if you don't know, you can find out a lot more about that on alisonpetty.com. But my nutshell version of this is that when I was 17, I was diagnosed with ME and Fibromyalgia, spent the following 24 years predominantly bedbound and in a wheelchair, living a very grim existence through those years. But my transformation back to full health was in 2016 when I attended an NLP training program. And from being on that course, I was never in a wheelchair again, never relapsed again, and spent the last almost 7 years now rock climbing, mountain biking, fully catching up on my life and all the things I love. And like Marc, it is now my life's purpose to help other people with their lives and figure out whatever it is that's holding them back. But my version of this confinement story is my many, many years. It was an 8-year relapse in my 20s to 30s, where I was pretty much in bed in a place in my life where I never expected to be when I was in my teens. Long periods of time where I was in a dark room, not being able to tolerate light or sound, and in chronic head to toe pain. So I have a very different version of it. But when Marc and I first met, we both resonated on this. Wow, we've both lived in very confined times and places in our lives. And have both come through it and are both doing our thing now to help other people. So, as I say, you can find out more about my story on alisonpetty.com. But this is really for Marc to tell us more about his story, and then we're going to just talk a bit about how we both dealt with those times, and hopefully give you guys some insights into if you're going through something similar, how you too can apply some really helpful mindset ways to help you come out the other side too. So, Marc, thank you for being here. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, well, I was recently on yours. We're doing each other's podcasts at the moment, and just really trying to spread our stories as far and wide as we can, to try and help other people in ways that we might not even know is possible. But it's just telling the stories and having the conversation. So tell us, in a slightly longer nutshell version than mine, but tell us, your sort of the points through that journey that were
Okay.
the really key
I
points.
don't know where to start, to be honest with you, but I mean, you touched on the fact that I was incarcerated for something I hadn't done. That was 2017. No, sorry, to tell a lie, that's when I got out. 2011 is when I got convicted. And I was given a sentence, which is a life sentence, an IPP, with no release date. And during that time, as you also touched on, I tragically lost all of my family whilst in there. But it's worth going backwards a bit, because the story doesn't start there. It started a lot earlier. When I was a kid, I used to be very badly bullied, and I got into a lot of trouble at school, or after school, I should say, just after. And I got myself into a gang, and I was involved in drugs and violence and all sorts of stuff, which I shouldn't have been. And I developed a whole set of antisocial beliefs and attitudes around that period, which dogged me through my adult life, until later on in my life, when I moved away from all of that. I was in my mid 30s. I was working, I was doing very well. I was working for a car dealership, but I was living a very, how can I put it, stressful lifestyle, where I was burning the candle at both ends. I hadn't really moved on internally, even though externally I seem to have. And the old saying that, karma comes around to bite you, things you've done in the past come back to haunt you, was true for me, because I got myself involved in a situation at a work Christmas party, which led to me getting sent to prison. And the reason why that happened is because I was in a very bad mental and emotional state at that stage, through pressures at work and so on, that when I did end up in a situation which triggered me, I reverted back to those old sets of beliefs and attitudes. And that led me to get involved in an altercation, which I ended up getting attacked in. I got attacked by 4 guys, and the altercation was not actually nothing to do with me. It was someone else's altercation, and I was just there. My girlfriend got attacked, and I stepped in to help her, and got attacked myself, ended up in hospital, badly beaten up and everything else. However, when it came to the police investigating it, it was me who got charged for it, and I was the one who got convicted. And the reason being is because of my past. And so, again, long story short, it's worth having the context there. I was no victim of injustice. Even though on the surface I was a victim of injustice, I chose to look beneath that at the reason why I was in that situation to begin with. So I was given what's called an IPP, and anyone who knows what an IPP is knows it's an inhumane sentence which has now been abolished. It's basically given to people who had committed similar offences twice, and it was basically a life sentence. So you've got no release date. They give you a sentence, and it's down to the parole board to determine if you're fit to be released at any stage. And I was given one of these, so I was told I'd never ever be released from prison at that stage, because no one was getting out, because the release test at that stage was that you had to prove to the parole board that you're never going to offend again, which is an impossible thing to do. So literally nobody was getting released, and there's a lot of campaigning still about people still languishing in prison on it, because basically it was when it was banned in 2016, if I'm right. It wasn't made retrospective, so the people in there still had to serve it, even though the release test was made, lower, so that people could get out. During that first 2 years, I was in prison for 6 years in total. I was working on myself, firstly, and because I recognized that it was my attitudes and beliefs that got me into that situation to begin with. So I did a lot of internal work during that period on courses. They make you do what's called offending behavior courses whilst in there, which theoretically reduce your risk, but in truth, all they do is open the door up to more courses. So you don't actually ever make progress as such. You're always going around in a circle. But I was doing the work. I was doing the work on myself. So after about 2 years, I was pretty much in a good place mentally and emotionally in that stage. And even though my appeals and everything else had been rejected, I was sort of very confident that I would, still get out. And even though at that stage there was no hope of that, I still believed I would. But then I come from a very close knit family, a very close, loving family, and I always had, a lot of support, a lot of love, a nice family home, and all of that sort of stuff. And it was 2013, Christmas 2013, that was suddenly found out my mum was ill, and she died within 2 weeks of being diagnosed with cancer, literally just 3 days before Christmas. And ironically, anyone with animals will understand this. We were big animal lovers, and we had 21 cats. My cat, who's my baby, who never left my side, died the day before my mum, tragically. But that was probably a bigger shock to me than losing my mum, to be fair, because I'd already been told my mum was in a coma, and I was given the option of going and seeing her. But I was also told that if I go and see her, I wouldn't be able to go to the funeral either. And I had to arrange the funerals myself, so I couldn't see my mum before she died. So I phoned my father in the morning. By now she's in hospital, she's in a coma. I'd phoned my father to find out what's happening, expecting the worst news from my mum. And he was in tears, and he said, Tipsy's died. And that completely threw me, because that's my cat. And I didn't expect that. And she was perfect health, nothing wrong with her. So that really took me, and I didn't know how to. So I had to race out of the cell, because at the time we were on 23-hour lockdown, which means that you're in your cell 23 hours a day, and you're not allowed to have a shower, or have a phone call, or anything like that. So that hour I was out was the only time I got to speak to my family during that time. So I had to race to the phone, to get to the phone before anyone else, to phone my father, to hear that my cat had died. Then I just hung the phone up, and all this noise going on around me just blocked it out, which went straight back to the cell. And that was at 10 a.m. in the morning on the 22nd of December. On the 20th of December. On the 21st of December, I did the same thing again, but this time it was my mum had died at the exact same time. So that was obviously the first part of it, I had to arrange all the funeral from prison. I had to do it all myself because my father was in no fit. So I've got no siblings, so I had to do it all myself, and that was no easy task, especially when you're on 23 hours lockdown. But luckily they gave me some, let me out to phone people and whatever else. But so long story short, I got moved to another prison to be closer to my father, which was nearer because I was in Kent at the time, and they moved me to a prison which was in Hertfordshire, where I'm from. And it was then that my father, I think he visited me once. I was talking to him on the phone one day, and he died as I was talking to him on the phone. He had a cardiac arrest and dropped down dead literally as I was chatting to him, like that, 11 o'clock in the morning, and I was in the cell at 12. So I had no way of finding out exactly what happened until 2-3 hours later when someone come to tell me. Even though I sort of knew he died, because obviously, you just get that feeling. So that was 3 months later. My grandfather, as you touched on, died also not long after. He died 4 months later. But all in all, I mean, that was that. And I had to arrange the funeral for my father. I had to sell the family home from prison as well, which was not an easy thing to do because I had to get that complete. I had to get all the cats rehomed. I had to get the house cleaned to be sold. I had to get it on the market, and I had to do all of that from prison. With the only help I really had was a few friends who went out and cleared the house out and things like that. So I had no family, no anything really, and so not even money at that stage. I had to get friends to send me money, and so that was not just to make phone calls. So it was a difficult time, but I held it together mentally and emotionally and got through that period, that first year. And in that first year, like I said earlier, if you calculate it all, it's 33 actually, 33 people, animals, and things such as my family home that I lost, that went like that in 1 year. So that's pretty much my life. Everything that ever mattered to me in my life. There was one person left on the planet who I still loved, and that was my ex-girlfriend. And it was a year later when I found out my ex-girlfriend was now with my best friend. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And so I took an overdose, had a heart attack, and nearly died. And luckily someone found me because I'd been moved that day, or no, it was the day before, to that wing, a new wing, which was an open wing. And it was during that time, because you could have a key to get in the door. If I'd have been on a normal wing and had done the same thing, I'd have been dead. But luckily someone opened the door, found me on the floor, gave me CPR, and here I am. And that was the start of my recovery, let's say.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I've read your story, we've talked, and just hearing you sort of tell it in that sort of it's just like bam, bam, bam. I mean,
That's how it felt.
yeah. Well, I just
Yeah.
like just one of those things on its own would have been enough.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
One of those things would have been more than enough. And I don't even know which one I would pick.
You
You know,
can't. You
you
can't
can't.
choose.
It's just,
No.
it's like, and to have all of those things, but all of those, as you said, not just human losses as well, but the loss of the family home as well, and all of that. It's just,
I think also, I mean, I know a lot of people don't put as much thing on the animal side of it.
oh
For
gosh,
me, that was huge.
yeah. Well,
That's
as you said,
and it's even harder to talk about because everyone wants to hear about your parents. Everyone will
mm,
talk about that, but who do you talk to about your cat dying in prison?
oh me. I mean,
Yeah, but you weren't in prison.
no, 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 no. I mean, who did you talk to about it? I mean, as in
No,
like,
out here it's different. But
yeah,
actually,
yeah, okay, yeah.
in jail, if you're talking to some hardened guy
Oh,
about
it's yeah, yeah,
their
of course,
cat
yeah.
dying,
They're
they're
just
just
gonna
going to
go,
laugh, and so you bottle all that up, don't you?
yeah,
And you
sure,
don't
sure.
deal with it. So
Mm.
yeah, I mean, so to me, they were just as much of a loss as a brother or a sister,
Mm.
and that's how it felt. And so yeah, it was just as hard. Every single one of them I see as an individual, and every one of them I had a bond with. So losing all of those animals was to me no different to losing
Yeah.
family members. Yeah.
Oh,
So
I mean, to me,
doesn't
animals are
count.
family, or
Mm.
and I think, as you said, what would have made it another level was the shock of it, because you were expecting, also obviously awful to know your mum about your mum and to be
Yeah.
preparing for that, but then to have that shock of that, sort of like,
It's just like I don't know how to describe it. It's like a numb feeling. It's like you just go into complete numb sensation mentally, and you get to that stage where I remember when my grandfather died, and I love my grandfather. I was extremely close to my grandfather. He had a massive influence on my life. I came back from work one day in prison, And I walked onto the wing, and the chaplain there, who by now I got to know very well, he said, he was just standing there, and I didn't even ask him. I just said, "It's my granddad, isn't it?" And he went, "Yeah." And it was just like, okay, another one. It got to that stage. I mean, this is like someone who massive influence in my life, but by that stage, it was so just give up with it. It was just like, what else can you take from me? Fine.
Mm.
And so, like I said, it was the final straw was my ex, and that's the one really buckled me. That really done me in. That did. Yeah, because I didn't expect it, and there was no way of seeing it happen, and like to know that I'd been manipulated by my best friend as well,
Gosh.
to get information about
Cool.
her. They'd never met. They'd never even met before. So it wasn't like they were friends and they'd got together. That he'd gone out of his way to meet her by using me to get to her. So that
And
was even
again,
worse.
that's another loss as well, as it's not just the ex-girlfriend, it's your best friend. So that's a
Yeah,
huge one.
huge loss. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that was so you like I said, that was the start of a recovery period because I hit rock bottom badly.
Mm.
Um, I don't think well, emotionally I was still blocked, but I mean, I hit rock bottom mentally, and took, like I said, I took an overdose, and I was in a very poor physical state as well. Very sick, very ill, and I had to lie about. At first, I had to lie about the fact I'd taken an overdose because I didn't want to lose my status in the prison. The fact that I'd got to a good wing, I thought I'd get kicked back to square one because that's what happens. You lose all your privileges. So I was worrying about that. So I'm at first, everyone was saying, "You've got to go to hospital. We've got to." And so I lied about that at first. They know now, but at first I had to say it was was it anaphylactic shock,
Mm.
and so I blocked it because I didn't want them to like look into what had happened. So gradually, I sort of I was in that sort of victim mindset for a period of time, and then I thought to myself, "This is not me, and I'm not." I've never seen myself as a victim. Again, it goes back to when I first got sentenced. I never, as much as everybody was saying, "Oh, it's a terrible victim, injustice," and it was because I shouldn't have gone to prison. But again, you've got to look at the bigger picture. And so with me in my situation, I didn't want to be the victim. I didn't want to feel that way. And I thought, I just got to take responsibility for me
Mm.
and do what I can to be better, get better. And at that stage, it was just a case of just trying to slowly get better, getting out of bed every day, just going to work, just going to the gym, the basics, just doing the basics to start off with. And that was hard. It was painful. I was literally in agony. But over a period of time, you start doing more and more productive things, and things start to change within you. And that was the start of the process I started, which is what I now do, broaden it in a broader perspective, do with people now. I help them sort of stop focusing on whatever it is restricts you in life and focus more within and what you can do to influence how you show up within your restriction. And so we've talked about it before. The life in a container talk I do is basically about this. It doesn't matter about it. My story is dramatic, and your story is dramatic, but there's a lot of, everybody's got some kind of restriction in their life. It doesn't matter what that is. Now, if you're only focused on that restriction in your life, then you're not focused on what you're doing within your situation to be the best version of yourself. You're not focusing on how productive you can be within your restriction. And it's easy to focus outwards at whatever the external stress is, poverty, COVID, whatever it is, ill health. So there's a lot of things that restrict us in life. But if you're only focused on that, you're never focused on what you can do within that situation. So that's really what I do, what did and do, is try and focus on me and how I can be at my most productive within that one moment, that one day. And if you can do that consistently over a period of time, eventually your restriction will change.
And when
And
was the point for you where you felt, was it when you were still in prison or when you came out, that you were like, I'm going to do something with this to help other people?
yeah,
Was there a time, or did it just gradually happen?
it was a strange way that happened because basically what happened was I started off, and like I said, step by step, getting myself better and healthier. And I got a job working in the education department in prison. And I was working with a wonderful woman who won the British Empire Medal, I think it's called. Brilliant teacher. I was a classroom assistant teaching critical reasoning skills, and I was also mentoring young kids in there. When I say kids, 21-year-olds. So I was doing a lot. I started a degree as well in there, and so basically I was working with her, and she did a course called a business course, and I started doing this business course. And during the business course, they asked me a question. They said, if you hypothetically wanted to start your own career, a business, what would that be? And the first thing that come to my mind, and I've never not heard this before in my life, was life coach. And I don't know where I got the term from. I don't know who. I just said it's a joke more than anything. And so anyway, this guy has gone off and he's done all the research, and he's brought back like all the details about it. And I looked through that, and I thought, you know what, I've got all the skills and attributes to do this. Anyway, so I forgot all about that, and that was about 2-3 years later. I'd now got out of prison. I secured release. That was a shock as well, because I wasn't expecting that at all. It came out of the blue completely. So basically, I got released, and I came out to nothing, no one, no home, no family, no friend. Well, my friends, but all moved on and done. They're all doing different things now. So life had completely changed irrevocably. But I had some money in the bank still from selling the family home, so I at least had some sort of comfort or platform. But it was a case of, what do I do? Where do I go? Who do I wasn't really in the right state of mind at that stage to go and get another job. I just wanted to heal mentally and emotionally. So I started having therapy. I was having counselling, and I was doing all of that. And I found coaching. And I started having Reiki and coaching and all of that sort of stuff to do, because I was blocked energetically, totally, completely blocked. And I realized that, and I needed to unblock myself really to move forward. So I went and saw this coach, and I was seeing her for a while. And over time, I said, like, I'm going to look into this. I want to become a coach. And she said to me, okay. And I was looking online at these diplomas and things you see online. And I thought to myself, I was just going to go for one of them. And she said to me, Mark, if you're going to do it properly. Don't take half measures, do it properly. And I said, okay. So I went on the ICF website, which, as you'll know, is the International Coaching Federation's website. And I looked at all their accredited, like, sort of training courses. And I found which I thought was the best one, which was IPEC, the Institute of Professional Excellence in Coaching. And I went for it. I just thought, sod it, and just went for it. And it cost me 16 grand. But it was a lot of money at the time, but it was well worth it. Best decision I ever made in my life. And the reason being is because I had no clue what I was getting myself into in terms of coaching. I thought I knew what coaching was, but you don't until you start doing it, really. But it wasn't that. It was the philosophy they taught me whilst in there. It's an amalgamation of what you do: NLP, Reiki, quantum physics, a whole realm of things, about 30 different disciplines. And so they taught me a whole new way of thinking and being, whole philosophy. And that's what transformed my life from the inside out. So it gave me a real structure to live by, a platform to live by. And it was that moment, that was my life. That was who I am. And obviously it takes you time to learn it and then start becoming it and breathing it and all of that, and practice it every single day. That takes time, but it was the best thing I ever did by a mile. Transform my life.
I think it's interesting with coaching, my own experience as well, is that everything I've learned through my training, and I mean, I'm an NLP I've done my training with the brilliant Dr. Phil Parker, who created the lightning process, which is the thing that got me not just back on my feet, but gave me my life back in spades. So I've just done my year of clinical training with him. So I'm now an advanced master practitioner of NLP coaching, hypnotherapy. But what that does for my clients is awesome. But what it does for me as well, as you just said, it's given me, I did my training, so 7 years into the course, probably like 5.5 years after I got well. So there's a little patch of time where I was just going out, finding out who I was at 41, because I was ill for 24 years, like chronically, and very much not living the life I would have lived. So going out, finding my feet and who I was in my adult life. But when I started doing that training, what it gave me as well, let alone what it was going to give my clients, and even just coaching, when I coach clients, what I learn from the interactions we have and what I find myself saying to them. So it's a really cool thing to be doing for other people, but also for ourselves as well, especially when
Oh,
we're
it's
going through
fundamentally
something that's
important.
so challenging.
I
So
agree.
yeah, I know. Yeah. No. Go on, what were you gonna say?
No, I agree. I mean, because I think you don't work as a coach; you are a coach, and unless you live
Yeah,
by your own sort of beliefs and attitudes and
absolutely.
things, then you're not going to help anyone.
No.
you
No,
know.
I mean, I found my thinking has changed. My mum will say this.
Mm,
My thinking, the way I talk about the things that come up in my life in the pandemic. So the only thing I can relate to, obviously, I can relate to the being in a very different way
mm,
confined. Like mine was bedbound, confined,
mm,
different to yours. But I thought, I had no idea if that was going to be the rest of my life. And as the years went on, that light at the end of the tunnel just kept getting further and further away because I was trying everything I could access, all the alternative therapies I could access, all the medications. They pretty much made me feel worse because of side effects, and nothing touched it. So, it gets your 20th year, and it's like, the rest, this could be, could be. And I think if I'd not found NLP in that particular
mm.
course, which is designed for switching off the fight or flight and is amazing. I mean, I've just spent a year training with Phil, and almost every module I've been like, thanks, Phil. Like, and he
Mm.
hears it all the time.
It makes a
It's not
massive
just me, it's
difference.
people all over the world that, get their lives back from this particular course.
Mm,
It's called the Lightning Process for anyone listening. And I'm always happy to talk about it if anyone wants to have that conversation. So yeah, so I think oh, I forgot what I was saying now because I just get so excited when I start talking about NLP. Like I just get all like, giddy. Like I call myself a self-confessed NLP fangirl. What was I saying, Mark?
I don't know. You're telling me about your journey.
No, it was, oh no, the bereavement thing. It was relating to that. So obviously we resonate on that, but obviously you went through all those bereavements as well. My version of that is in the pandemic, I was one of the people, my family, but obviously I'm talking about my own experience, I speak for my family, but we as a family were one of the families in the very early pandemic before the first vaccines that lost somebody very significant and had to deal with that. And that was my father, who, for me and for my family, him and my mum, greatest people that ever lived. My dad was my best friend since I was as long as I can remember. My mum is too. We still have her, very luckily. That was always going to be, one of the greatest, most awful moments of my life. I always imagined growing up I would throw myself off a cliff one day. It was like that. I obviously wasn't going to actually do that, but I would never have been able to see how I could have functioned when that moment happened with my dad and my mum. And obviously my brother, I have a brother and his darling niece and his partner who's like a sister to me. So, but growing up, that was my dad and my mum. Because then that sort of parental role. Um, and yeah, and we had to deal with that before the vaccine. He passed away from a heart attack. We had a few days notice, but they didn't think it was going to be anything other than they gave him tablets for I don't know what it's called now, but they sent him home. He was 80-ish, early 80s at the time, but because of the pandemic, they didn't keep him in hospital because he was that vulnerable type. Sent him home. Some things didn't quite get perhaps picked up that should have been. A few days later, 3 in the morning, it was that was it. And I was living in Wales at the time, couldn't just go home and be there. And to get to the funeral, I had to self isolate for 2 weeks. And the only way I could do that 100% was going. So my mum, who similar age, a lot of mobility issues, head injury, but absolutely brilliant and just so on it, and very functional in lots of other ways, but just elderliness and health issues. My brother and his partner took her to their home that same night, that same day, and she's lived with them ever since because she can't live on her own. So there was a bungalow where I'd grown up in, and I'd spent many, many adult years in, which isn't normal. That I had an 8-year relapse in my 20s to 30s, where I had to go home, and I lived with them again. And they were I don't like the word carers, but they were the people that looked after me all through those 24 years. So we had a sort of an unusually close relationship. And the only thing I'm very, very, well, one of the things I'm very, very grateful for is that my dad, before he passed, saw me with about 5 years of full health. He saw me rock climbing in Spain 5 times before lockdown. He saw me fully living my life. So there would have been no worry in his mind about any of that. Because that, I think I was always a worry, like what was going to happen to me, when they weren't able to look after me anymore or no longer here.
mm,
I'm bedbound in some flat somewhere in Brighton. So yeah, I think that for me, but having to deal with that, I had to go and self isolate in that family home just after my father passed away on my own. My friends who lived on the same streets, around, couldn't just come and visit me and sit with me. Thank God for FaceTime. I would spend the evenings just crying, friends on FaceTime, and mum 10 minutes down the road, but I can't go and see her and my brother until 2 weeks. And then we had the funeral, and there was 5 of us there and a camera on the wall. It was that
wow.
situation. And then I took on the role. My brother and Kirsten were looking after my mum and dealing with all the epic amounts of paperwork, and I took on the role of dealing with the house that we had to sell. And again, nobody could come help me. Friends in the same streets, and nobody could just come around and help me with, like, I think it was, I packed up something like 96 boxes or something in the end. And and dealing with the selling, and Kirsten was brilliant with all of that, my brother. And but yeah, I really resonate with that, and having to deal with something that is just so horrific at the best of times, at a
Yeah.
time when you are just so, I mean, I always remember just realizing, I think it was in those 2 weeks before the funeral. And I also knew that if I couldn't stay in that house, which was so unbelievably painful, my mum, every now and again when I go through something really difficult, like really difficult, my mum has since reminded me, if you could sit on that couch for 2 weeks where, your dad is no longer, and you can't just come and see us, and you're doing this for this funeral, or, you can do anything. And it is absolutely, I said to her not so long ago as well, that I would rather have those 24 years back of chronic illness and go through that sort of 18 months of that time again, because it was just so horrific. But I remember thinking, this is so bizarre in history of the world, not the world maybe, but in terms of having FaceTime and things like that in our modern society, that there are other people around the world that are having to do these weird self-isolations in these, very lonely places to go to a funeral. And if they can't stay in that place, they don't get to go to that funeral. And I knew that if I couldn't stay in that bungalow, I wasn't going to my dad's funeral. Sorry, it's a bit much, obviously it's very much. But yeah, so I resonate with that with you. Tell me, like, for you, like when you were going through the darkest times, and I'm sure there were many, many, many dark times, but what was your sort of, where did you find your strength? Because you mentioned somewhere a bit earlier on, can't remember how you said it. I was sort of holding it in my mind because it really stood out for me. That you, I think it was that you were going to get out. It was something about you were going to get out. It just
Inner
wasn't a thing
belief.
for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
So during those really dark times, particularly, and the other times, what was it for you that gave you the strength within you? Where did you find that strength within you?
Good question. Well, there's two things. I mean, firstly, the inner belief that I've always had is that I will be successful in whatever it's like being in what I'm doing now. I haven't. There's difficult times now. We're all going through difficult times in one way or another. But even at the times when sometimes I felt like giving up because it's not been going the way I wanted it to, or thought it should, or there's been obstacles that I've had to overcome, or COVID. I started my business a month before COVID. So there's been obstacles. There's been times when you haven't got any clients come in, all sorts of stuff that comes in your way. Now it's easy to give up when things don't go the way you expect them to. You've got to have a belief. You've got to have an inner core belief that you will be successful no matter what. And if you've got that, that'll get you through the times which are difficult. It will keep you moving forward despite the obstacles that you've got to go through, or around, or above, or whatever. And if you know that whatever happens, it's all for your greater good, you're always moving in the right direction. Everything happens for a reason. There's always something to learn and grow from. Everything that you encounter in life becomes an opportunity. It doesn't become a problem. So therefore, even if you're in the worst possible imaginary situation you can think of, like we've just discussed, you can still turn that to a positive by changing the way your perspective views it. You reframe your thinking so you can actually see as an opportunity. What can I learn from it? How can I keep moving forward? And that's what I do. I've always done that, to be fair. I just do it now. Now I've done it. I've learned it. I do it with clients. I do it in a different way. But I've always had that sort of optimism, that belief in me that I'll be successful no matter what. I just didn't know how I was going to be successful. And I still don't. But you don't need to know the hows. You don't need to be in control of every little thing. You just have to have the faith and belief and trust the process that it will happen. And if you can do that, things will happen. The other part of that is the belief that I never see myself as a victim, and that comes from my mother. And that was a belief that she ingrained in me all my life as a kid. Never see yourself as a victim. Always see yourself as someone who's either a survivor or someone who's strong, or you can move forward, or whatever, however you want to look at it. So I've always had that sort of core belief where I will not be a victim to anything, because I'm not the person who wants the sympathy. I don't want all of the poor you sort of stuff. Never enjoyed that. Never taken any enjoy. It makes me feel worse. So if I'm always very careful, if even now, if someone says, I'm so sorry you went through what you did, I'll say I'm not, because I've grown and learned. Don't get me wrong, I'd love to have my family back in a moment, but from what I've got to focus on what I've gained from it, not what I've lost. Because if you're focusing on what you lose in life, you're a victim, and that's not what I am. I've always focused on what being grateful for the things that I've got, rather than not what I haven't got. So by focusing on my mind, having that mindset, it's enabled me to get through things which would normally have crushed me. Don't get me wrong, there's been plenty of times where I've had that victim mindset, or I've been in a really bad place mentally and emotionally, but I'm able to snap out of it quite quickly because of, the fact that I don't enjoy feeling that way.
I think it's just like this human, isn't it? When, whenever I'm working with clients and we're talking about changing that mindset and creating these new roadmaps for their brain, it's like not negating the fact that, we're human and we will slip back into those old ways of being. I coach people daily for the last year and a half, and I still struggle sometimes with my own mental health. Like, it's
That's normal.
exactly, that's part of being human. It's just learning how to, when you catch those things, gaining those tools to learn how to, because not some people are very, as you say, that was always you anyway, and some people it's like they've got to sort of figure out how to sort of bring that into their world, because it's not always so natural
I
for some.
wouldn't say it's always been me. I mean, I would say I
Well,
learned skills since then. It's been part of me, but
yeah,
since then I've got the skills which have honed it, if that makes sense.
sorry, that's what I mean.
Yeah,
You just said
yeah,
something like it's kind of
yeah.
like that's always been part of sort of the way of being, but now you're able
Yeah.
to really
I've
sort of,
always been an optimist rather than a
yeah,
pessimist in terms of the
yeah.
way I see life. But I mean, I've always tried to look at the bigger picture and things like that. But yeah, since I learned since I went to IPEC, they work with a way of. It's worth explaining so people understand. There's two types of energy. You've got catabolic energy, anabolic energy. Catabolics are tearing down, draining energy. We've all got this. It's scientific. Anabolic, you've probably heard of anabolic steroids. Is a building up constructive sort of energy. Now we've all got that, and there's IPEC works to the premise that there's 7 levels of energy within all of us, and we all have different levels of energy at any given time. It's a continuum. Now, on a normal day, you will have a high level of energy in anabolic areas. However, when you experience anything that's stressful in life, your energy drops from highly anabolic or anabolic areas down to catabolic, and that is the fight and flight. So you drop down to this energy, which is level 1 and 2 in the continuum. Level 1 is victim energy. Level 2 is conflict. They're both catabolic levels. Now, what I do with a client is I help identify the energy thought in terms of our thoughts or perceptions, our beliefs, our attitudes into these 7 levels of energy. So a client or anybody can actually see where they are in terms of their mindset and their emotions at any given time. Now, if you're experiencing a lot of catabolic energy, guess what? You're going to be feeling like a victim. You're going to be feeling angry or frustrated or whatever. If you don't want to feel that, you can choose not to by changing your perspective, your beliefs, your attitudes, so that you're tuning into a more anabolic level of energy. So the more anabolic energy any of us have, the more productive we are in life. The more catabolic energy we have, the less productive we are. So really, it's learning how to harness your own energy so that it's working for you at any given time. And if you're able to sort of identify or categorize your beliefs, your thoughts, your perspectives, your feelings into different categories, like for instance, a level 5 category for me is all about opportunity. It's about seeing things opportunity. So if I'm feeling frustrated, I'll say to myself, right, what would a level 5 perspective look like? And then that changes my whole view of a situation in an instant. That creates a chain reaction from my thought to my emotions to my actions. And if you can live in that sort of mindset continually every day of your life, consistently over a long period of time, you will create success in every area of your life, one way or another.
No, that's cool. I love that. And well, I mean, you talked a little bit about how you work with clients, and we'll come back to that in a moment. But before we do, what advice would you give to somebody who is, in some way, shape, or form, as I say, our situations are extremely different, but we both know what it's like to live with confinement, with not knowing whether it is ever going to end, how it's going to end, you know.
What advice would I give? Like I said to you earlier, stop focusing outward, start focusing inward.
Mm.
Simple. Stop focusing on whatever it is that restricts you and start focusing on what you can do to be the best version of yourself in that given moment.
And what about what steps? Because for some people, again, that might be a little bit of a harder stretch to like
Mm,
just do that. So what steps would you help? You know, if you're working with somebody
mm,
that's in that, you know, like those just sort of steps to how to change that thinking, like you
mm.
just said about, you know, the level 5 thing. So for me, my version of that is, you know, if I this thing I do with clients, you know, if you catch a negative thinking, it's pausing that, you know, not engaging with it, but then it's asking the question, the right question of yourself. So similar thing of like, you know,
Awareness, isn't it? It's
what thought could I
awareness.
what thought could I have instead that's going to take me in the right direction? And then as soon as you start to do that, you have that chain reaction, as you said, of
I agree.
taking the right direction. So something like that is a, you know,
Well,
just as
yeah, I think you've nailed it. I mean, it's self-awareness. I mean, the more aware we are of our thinking, the more able we are to catch those thoughts when they happen. And we're all going to have them. I've read a study recently which said 98% of all of our thoughts during any given day is in the subconscious realm, which means they're always going to be influenced by 4 different things: limiting beliefs, assumptions, interpretations, and fears. All of your subconscious thinking will go through those lenses. That means that everything you see will be influenced by that. So every perception you have is going to be only a fragment of what's really going on. You're never going to see the big picture if you're seeing things through that lens. So it's very important to be able to switch that subconscious mind off and be aware of what your thinking is without those 4 blocks influencing that, and being able to switch off judgment and see things with objectivity and clarity. Because when you do that, you'll suddenly see the situation differently, and that gives you optimism, that gives you clarity, and then you can then choose which way you want to go forward. So self-awareness is key, because without that, you've got nothing. You've got no ability to switch your thinking off. You haven't got the ability to stop overthinking, and that leads on to anxiety and stress and things like that. You know, the more aware we are of that, the more we could stop overthinking and worrying about things. And that's what will help us get better and
yeah.
start moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. I always, you know, believe as well. It starts with awareness when you're wanting to make the change, and you know, if yeah, I mean, awareness is kind of everything really in so
It
many ways.
is it's key,
Yeah.
and acceptance. I think the two go hand in hand,
Yeah,
awareness and acceptance, because acceptance is another hard thing for a lot of us to master, me included, because it includes self-acceptance. And there's a lot of things we don't particularly like about ourselves. We're all critical and judgmental people or beings, and whether that be of others or ourselves. And if we're doing that, what we're not again doing is giving ourselves the full picture,
yeah,
and we
yeah.
hold ourselves back.
And that objectivity word as well, I always find that once you're able to get a little bit of distance, even if it's a tiny bit of distance, sometimes I'll say to people, you know, if you catch yourself in the kitchen and you're making a cup of tea and you hear those negative thoughts, literally move. Like go and stand a few meters away, look back at where you were standing and just see that person. You know, it can be little things like that that can just enable that shift of perspective. Because we just, you know, sometimes we can't see the wood for the trees and it feels like the thing is inside of us. I always say, you know, like in the not so good way, you know, say someone's dealing with a really difficult situation with a dynamic or something, but that person's not in the room, but it can feel like you don't know where they end and you begin. And that's usually a really, you know, that romantic, corny sort of Hollywood line. But that thing of like just not knowing where the thing ends and you begin, there's no objectivity. So just finding ways to distance as
You
well.
get
And
lost, don't you? You can get lost in your own thoughts and things like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Just
Just stepping
before you
back
know it.
from it. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I think when you're, I don't know, you'll probably all do as well. People with struggling with anxiety, it's very difficult for people with that. You know, especially people who've got some sort of diagnosed illness, to switch those thoughts off. It can be it can be, and it just becomes overwhelming after a while, and you just literally lose control of your thoughts and you know,
Yeah.
feelings as a result. So it can be very difficult to do, but once you do get into the rhythm of it, the way to do it, and practice doing it, and literally switching your thinking off and meditating, being in the moment, being focused on the now. I don't worry about anything anymore. And that's because even if I mean, it's not because I'm superhuman. It's because every time I find myself doing that, I'm aware enough to stop it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But that
And
takes the
that's,
practice, doesn't it?
of
That's
course,
like,
it takes
yeah,
practice. I
yeah,
mean, it's
exactly.
not easy, but you know, I'm at that stage now where I'm aware enough of my own thinking to be able to recognize when I always say to people I'm working, like, again, it's an alarm clock. Your moods are an alarm clock, because the moment your energy drops, that's your indication that you're not thinking something that's in line with what you want to be feeling. So that's your alarm clock to stop whatever you're doing and literally give yourself a minute to switch your thinking off and ask yourself that question: What am I telling myself? What's the thought that I am actually telling myself about whatever the situation is that I'm experiencing? As soon as you check in with yourself and say, right, okay, I'm telling myself I'm not good enough, let's say, then ask yourself the question, how does that make me feel? Okay, I'm telling myself I'm not good enough. How am I feeling? I feel lousy. I don't feel good. Okay, when you're feeling lousy or no good, what's your actions going to be like? How productive are they? Oh, well, they won't. They'll be counterproductive. And again, that's normal. That's normal for all of us. We're human beings. But when you flip that perspective, when you are aware of what you're actually telling yourself subconsciously or even consciously, you can actually create a different change reaction. So I am good enough. How do you feel when you tell yourself you are good enough? I feel great. What are your actions going to look like if you feel great? They're going to be positive, productive. And that's exactly what we have to do when we find ourselves slipping, when we find ourselves moving. So you just have to be aware of the thinking enough to stop it and then change it.
It's all about the language. And I mean, anyone who knows anything about me or watches any of my stuff, I'm always banging on about the power of language and how that's very much a big part of the structure of what creates the foundation for our life, and whether it's a strong scaffolding or scaffolding that's just going to collapse underneath you. But you start to ask this, this thing about asking questions we ask of ourselves and how we ask those questions. If we say, why do I always feel so bad about myself, the brain's going to answer that exact question. It's not going to come back at us and wait a minute, you want to feel good about yourself. It's going to go and come back with answers to why I feel so bad about myself. Whereas if I say, what is really great about me? Like, how can I feel better about myself? My brain's going to go, no, surely you want to feel bad. It's going to go, right, cool, right. What can we find, in that archive, in our, in a universe that's going to give her those answers, going to make her feel good and send her in the right direction. So,
Yeah, and I
awesome.
think, yeah, I mean, touching on that as well, most of the thing, I mean, it comes back to my story when we said a lot of my not limiting, yeah, they are limiting, core beliefs we develop at young ages, and we're
Oh,
not aware half the time that
no,
half the stuff that goes on in our minds, and we have that through our life. So a belief you created when you're 5 years old will still be influencing you now into your 40s.
oh God.
It's crazy.
Outrageous. I mean, you and me, everyone we work with, ourselves included, myself included, definitely, and just it's those things that we pick up along the way, those stories, those narrations, even EastEnders. I've just put a PDF together. It's like a worksheet I give to clients. It's on my yeah, for anyone listening, it's on my website. It's free download. Just go to the download section or sign up to my newsletter, and you'll get access to 4 free ones. But I talk about that. It's like these responses. This one is called the response reality check, and I won't go into the depths of it now. But it is those stories that we pick up from society, from our my responses as an English being will be different to an American's being response to a certain situation, but also like EastEnders or Green Chill, all those different like influences that we've had through our lives, let alone our families.
And there's
So
loads. There's loads.
good and not so good, obviously.
Mhm.
So yeah, no, it's all about that, but it's learning
Well,
how to
everything is influenced
update
by
them
that.
and create the new version that's appropriate for who we are today, not the one that was when we were 5.
Yeah, you're right, and I think working with a lot of people with fear-based beliefs,
Absolutely.
it's fascinating how many people, when you really dig into it, um, and actually uncover it's like a ball of string. I mean, like you unravel the ball of string until you find the core belief at the
Yeah,
bottom. And so many people have done that with me, and it turns out the belief they had was such a silly thing
yeah,
that they developed for no stupid reason, but it's now dogging them in whatever. It could be like, for instance, I had a guy who was doing was he does speaking, and he used to get into terrible anxiety every time he used to have to speak in front of people at work. And it was only when we delved into it and really uncovered it all that it turned out, it was something silly. It was like he'd been laughed at school when he spoke. That's sorry. Well, I'm going off there. Yeah, and he spoke, and everyone laughed at him. And that was, I think he was about 10 years old. And
yeah.
ever since then, he's had that in his subconscious mind. So every time he gets in a situation where he has to speak, that's how he feels. He feels like that 10-year-old boy again.
I've had the exact same client. Not the exact
Yeah,
same
I think a
client.
lot of us
I've
have.
had the exact same story, and it's
Yeah,
just
it's a
like
normal thing.
updating that
Mm.
narration that's in their head. Because I always say to people, it's like there was a point, using that as an example, or using my guy, it was a drumming recital, and he'd been given presentations all through his later uni days, terrified of it. Brilliant every time it would go fine, but terrified. Went back to when he was about 14, gave a drum recital, dropped a drum six, and kid laughed. But the point up until that, he was super confident. And I was saying to him, when that happened, you had a response to it. You dealt with it the best way you could in that moment, but your brain created on autopilot a narration. And it's just so interesting to me that I was Discovery Call was saying the same thing to somebody today about phobias. It's like the brain doesn't know to go, okay, we've dealt with it, right? We'll go back to feeling really good about this thing. That just becomes the new story, and you carry on with that until you're enabled by, using somebody like us to go into that internal universe and create a new story, but consciously, not on autopilot. And the brain doesn't then go, no, no, wait, you're really, really scared of presentations. Wait, hang on. It goes, oh, cool, presentations are fine. And
Exactly.
I had
I've
a
got this. I'm cool.
yeah, I
You
had a
know.
lady with a phobia a
So
couple of
same. Yeah. You were just. I was going to say same with phobias.
Yeah,
Exactly the
I
same.
had a lady, and at the end of 40 minutes, she couldn't remember what the phobia was she'd had at the start of the
Yeah.
session because we just changed the narration. And she was sat there looking at me going, what was it? She was laughing, going, I can't, I don't even, I was like, yeah, forget about it, it's all gone. The
It's,
brain dropped going, no, no, hang on, you're really scared of like sleeping on your own. It's like, no, no, we're good.
I
So,
think the irony here is, I mean, I think the fact is so many of us in life generally have no clue about the power of the mind and how much it influences everything that we do. And if we did know the power that we've got, then
yeah,
we're doing so much more with our lives. And this is why it's important to have coaches like ourselves and to actually help people unleash that, because we do live in a society which is stigmatized by, where the industry is stigmatized to an extent and so on. And I think, yes, a lot of people buy into it, but there's so many people who don't. And I think this is why it's important for people to get that message out there of how important it is, like yourself in your situation, or myself and anyone else who's been through some sort of life-changing journey, but using the mindset to show that, because, there's so many people out there, especially in this current climate that we're all living in, who need that ability, opportunity to sort of like unlock their life, really.
well,
That's
that
start.
brings us,
You don't have
sorry.
to be a millionaire to be happy. I'm not a millionaire, but I'm happy. I'm more happier now than I've ever been.
Mm.
And that's because of what I do every day with my mind.
That brings us perfectly round to if somebody wanted to speak to you, how can they get in
That's
touch?
it. I don't talk to anyone. No.
Oh, okay, okay.
There's a
Recording.
waiting list, 1,600. No, yeah, you can contact a lot. I do, as you know, you've been on it. I do a podcast. This is called the Tell Them Back and Then Some podcast, which is named after my soon to be released book,
Yep.
which is also going to be out, touch wood, at the end of this year, or hopefully before then. I do a lot of my work on Facebook at the moment. I also do a lot of work on LinkedIn. You see me on there, so you can find me on there. Marc Singer, Mark with a C, MARC Singer, the men's coach. I've got a website, but I'm getting updated at the moment, so it's going to be out again soon, as we talked about before. But other than that, the best way to get me is probably by linking up and following me on Facebook on my business page on there, because that's where I do a lot of my work, or following me on YouTube, because again, my podcasts, I've got something like 120 um, weekly 10 shows where I give advice about the mindset, which is also on there. So there's plenty of stuff people can get their teeth into in there. But if anyone's interested in working on a one-to-one basis, they can contact me through my email, phone number, or Facebook. I also do speaking events. My keynote speaking event is called Life in a Container, How to Stay Positive While Serving a Life Sentence. And I work with businesses, universities, schools, prisons, you name it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I'll put the details. I'll put your email, maybe your phone number on here because there's, people can find you on social media just by Google. I
Yeah.
mean, I did earlier, not earlier, sorry, last week. Marc Singer and you just came up in different places. But I'll put your email and your phone number on the
Yeah. If you put that up there, that's fine. People can get me on all of that. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, and likewise for me, if anyone that follows me knows where to find me, but if you don't yet, alisonpetty.com, and I'll put my details in. I always open to conversations as well. And just for my own version, it's like, obviously always offer the coaching, but I'm always happy, and I'm sure you are, Mark, as well, to just talk about the story. Because I think for some people, I always think, I'd have loved to have spoken to me 20 years ago and heard me tell my story. So I always offer that as no obligation for any kind of coaching, because sometimes that can just be enough to give someone that shift that they need.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So thank you, Mark. I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate you sharing the story, and what an awesome story it is. I'm certainly not going to say poor you. I'm going to say well done you, like, for just going through such a immense amount of difficult things all in, you know, a long period of time, but just one after another. But getting to where you are today, and now, as I say for myself, like I've walked the walk, I'm talking the talk, and you've very much done that as well in spades and using it for such great good now, helping other people. So bravo you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having the conversation with me and sharing your story and
My pleasure. And you keep up with good work as well.
just how yeah, cool. Well, we're both going to be on each other's things now,
Oh yeah.
and it is all about just, you know, the more we can tell it, the more we can get it out there. You know, you just never know who's listening. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
If we inspire one person, it's all worthwhile.
exactly. Oh, very quickly tell your story about that.
What one?
You told me a story where you got a message from somebody that heard something. You think it was on
Well,
Instagram.
when I did the reel, you mean?
Yeah, and you
I
just said,
saved her life, sort of thing.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, no, that was how long ago was that? I can't remember. Anyway, I was doing reels. I do reels, 1 minute reels on Facebook, and basically, I was having a bit of a day where I was considering not bothering doing them anymore because I'm not a massive fan of them, really. If I'm honest, I'm a bit of a technophobe, but I was like, oh, is anyone actually watching this like that? That's what I was telling myself. And literally about what 5-10 minutes after I said that to myself, I got a message on Messenger from a woman who I didn't know, saying, "Thank you so much. You've saved my life today." Just
yeah,
by
yeah,
watching my reel, and I was just like, if no one else watches it, just one person's watched it, and that makes it
exactly.
worthwhile. So there you go.
You do never know who's listening
Yeah,
and who's going to help. So
exactly.
yeah,
So always
lovely.
put it out into the universe because I guarantee you, someone will
Mm,
receive it.
yeah. All right, Mark. Thank you so much. Brilliant. And well, we'll be in touch anyway because you
Yeah.
know. That's absolutely no doubt. But thank you so much, and I'll put all the details in the chat. So yeah,
Thank
and
you.
it'll be on YouTube, and well, at some point it'll be on my actual podcast as well. But always invite people to subscribe and follow and leave any comments. We'd obviously love to hear your feedback and get in touch as well. So
Wonderful.
thank you. Thanks for listening, and thank you again, Mark. Cool.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.